One of the most common and sometimes popular misconceptions of the Reformation is this. We often assume that in the 16th century, the Reformers are reacting against the entire Middle Ages. And sometimes this impression is given even by the language that we use. We will say, we will use labels like the Dark Ages. We have to remember, though, that the Middle Ages is close to, if not more than, 1,000 years, almost half of church history, and it's quite diverse in many ways. Were the Reformers responding to everything and anything? Absolutely not. Actually, they were responding to something quite specific. When we think of the Middle Ages, we can divide it up into three periods. The early Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, where you see the rise of scholasticism, and then the late Middle Ages, which is more on the eve of the Reformation itself. So let's just take an example, Martin Luther. In 1517, what exactly is Luther so upset about? Well, there's two sides to this coin. On the one hand, Luther has a pastoral mind, and so he's disturbed by the abuse of indulgences. But there's another side to that coin. Just months before, not even that long, before he publishes his 95 Theses, Luther writes a disputation against scholastic theology. Well, contrary to the impression that very ambitious title might give, when you read these arguments and theses that Luther puts forward, he's actually responding to certain individuals. He has in mind Scotus and William of Ockham, and especially Gabriel Biel, because Luther was trained by professors who taught him and had him read the works of Gabriel Biel. Well, it's a long and complicated story, but essentially, this is the age of the Via Moderna, in which this modern way actually turned against prior scholastics and their Augustinian understanding of grace. And instead, by means of what's called a voluntarism and a nominalism, they then perpetuated an understanding of grace that some said was at best semi-Pelagian, at worst even Pelagian itself. As if God makes a covenant in which his absolute will is so primary that if you just do your best and do what is within you, well, then God will reward you with grace and what's necessary to merit justification. Luther tried it on for size, and in his own experience, Luther went almost mad because he started to ask probing questions. How do I know when I've done my best? And even if I think I've done my best, how do I know I don't have a blind spot? How do I know God won't change his mind? Yes, he's made this promise, but what if, according to his absolute will, what if he actually goes back on his promise? Well, all of this created a crisis in Luther. And as Luther in 1517 started to react, he reacted specifically to this Via Moderna understanding of God and specifically its understanding of salvation. In turn, Reformation theology, specifically its understanding of grace, was born out of this context. And it actually gives us a better understanding of what the Reformation was responding to and what it was not responding to. It was not responding to just all of medieval scholasticism, but its more recent innovations and, as some would say, even its more semi-Pelagian innovations and deviations from what the church taught before.